Professor Stephen Hawking's scientific genius was devoted to unravelling the complexities of the universe. But there was one area of human life for which he could find no solution. Women, they are a complete mystery, he replied. When asked on his 70th birthday what subject occupied his daily thoughts the most, the comment, given in an interview with the New Scientist magazine, was typical of Professor Hawking's self-deprecating humour. Renowned for his brilliant mind and bloody-minded courage in the face of a crippling, terminal disease. He was the first to admit he was a man like any other, with a love of glamour and an eye for a pretty face. Professor Hawking kept a poster of Marilyn Monroe on his bathroom door, the iconic floating skirt image from the 1955 movie The 7-Year Itch. On his 60th birthday, with can-can girls draped over his chair, a Marilyn impersonator treated him to a breathless rendition of I Wanna Be Loved by You. When nightclub impresario Peter Stringfellow once spotted the academic at one of his venues, he asked if he could be spared a minute to chat about the universe. Then said, "Or would you rather look at the girls?" There was silence for a moment, recalled Stringfellow. And then he answered, "The girls, of course." The two women who most shared his remarkable journey were his first wife, Jane Wilde, mother of his 3 children Robert, Lucy, Tim, and second wife Elaine Mason, the nurse for whom he left Jane. Yesterday Jane, 73, who remained close to her former husband until his death in the early hours of yesterday, said she was deeply saddened by the death of our dear Stephen. She added, "I am glad to be able to say he died peacefully in the comfort of his own home. The peace that he has found is well earned after such an extraordinary and courageous life. We shall feel his loss keenly for a long time." Professor Hawking had been ill since Christmas, and though his death was not unexpected, his family is said to be devastated by his loss. His second wife, Elaine, 68, who was divorced from the scientist in 2006 after 11 years of marriage, looked red-eyed as she spoke from her home in Chipping Campden, Gloucestershire, describing her ex-husband as the love of her life. "He was a wonderful man who was very, very special. I am still reeling. I am really upset. His death was a relief for him. I believe he was the love of my life and I very reluctantly had to let go of him." Elaine went on to claim that Professor Hawking proposed to her twice after their divorce, because he had never come to terms with their separation. But it was Jane and their 3 children whom he invited to his 75th birthday party at his Cambridge home in January last year, which they celebrated with friends and a huge firework display. It is they who are now planning his funeral. Married in 1965. Jane and Stephen Hawking divorced in 1995, 5 years after the professor had left her for Elaine. Jane would later recount in her raw and brutally honest memoir, on which The Theory of Everything, the 2015 film starring Eddie Redmayne, was based, that coping with his disability, his fame and 3 small children had, at times, left her in a black hole of despair. Professor Hawking's former PA, Judy Feller, told the Mail yesterday that Jane never stopped feeling responsible for her ex-husband and continued to care for him right to the end. "You cannot imagine how difficult it must have been for Jane and the children in the early years," says Judy, who worked for Professor Hawking for 14 years from the 70s. They remained friends and she, too, attended his 75th party. They stayed close because of their shared devotion to their 3 children. And there was something very beautiful about that towards the end of his life. In her 2007 memoir Travelling to Infinity, My Life with Stephen, Jane recalled the first time she encountered Stephen in 1963 while walking through their hometown of St. Albans with a friend. "We had scarcely gone 100 yards when a strange sight met our eyes. Lolloping along in the opposite direction was a young man with an awkward gait, his head down, his face shielded under an unruly mass of straight brown hair," recalled Jane. A few months later they met at a party. Hawking was then a 21-year-old cosmology research student at Cambridge, and shortly afterwards Jane learned that he had been diagnosed with some terrible, paralyzing, incurable disease. "They reckon has probably only got a couple of years to live," a mutual friend told her. But a week later Jane, who admitted she was already falling for Stephen, met him again on a station platform. He was initially reluctant to contemplate a long-term relationship, and his parents warned Jane that their son's life would be short, but ignoring their better judgment, they fell in love and were married in 1965. "He had beautiful eyes and this amazing sense of humor, so we were always laughing. "I was young and I had lots of energy and optimism, and that did make a difference," said Jane in a 2015 interview. "But most importantly, I loved Stephen and wanted to do my best for him. So I thought I could easily devote 2 years of my life to help somebody I loved, someone who has so much potential, achieve his ambitions." Black and white photographs from their weddings show a happy couple. Hawkins came the only outward sign of the progression of his illness. The marriage would, contrary to the doctor's bleak prognosis, last for a quarter of a century and lead to the birth of 3 children. But despite many happy times, by the time Elaine Mason, a flame-haired nurse, came into the couple's life in 1985, the Hawkins marriage had long been in crisis. Elaine was employed after a pneumonia infection nearly killed Professor Hawking. He recovered but needed round-the-clock care and could no longer speak. Elaine's first husband, engineer David Mason, made the voice box which created the robot-like vocal tone for which the physicist was famous. Jane has since said that from the moment the nurses came into their home, their household was turned upside down. The publication of her husband's best-selling book, A Brief History of Time, in 1988 only made things worse, she said. The book sold 10 million copies in 40 languages, and Jane would later reveal she felt that the family had been left behind. "To me, Stephen was my husband and the father of my children. One does not say to one's husband, 'Oh, you are so clever, I must worship the ground under your feet.' Or in this case, wheels." "I found this kind of sycophantic attitude exceptionally frustrating." She added that it drew all sorts of people into our circle and made our home life intolerable. Jane relied heavily on PA Judy Fuller, a married mother of 3 who was employed by Hawking after answering a small ad in a local newspaper which stated a scientist was looking for a part-time secretary. Judy, Hawking's right-hand woman for 14 years, will never forget the twinkle in his eyes when he first interviewed her for a job back in the 70s. "He was the most lovely of men, and from that first day we just clicked," says Judy, who remains fond of Jane and the children. "He liked a pretty face and I was a young, slim, blonde mother of 3. We became the greatest of friends. And we had a lovely working, professional relationship, although he loved fame and glamour. He was happiest when he was treated as an ordinary person. He loved a glass of wine and going to restaurants and would often ask a nurse to put him in the car and take him out for an Indian meal." Jane, meanwhile, had grown close to family friend choir master Jonathan Hellier Jones, whose own wife had died of leukemia. He moved into the Hawkins family home in Cambridge in the late 70s, and Professor Hawking grew jealous of the friendship, believing Jane was lining up a new husband for when he died much later. Both Jane and Stephen would write with remarkable honesty about how their marriage cracked under the strain of his fame and increasing disability. In her memoir, a tome she now says was penned while still raw with anger, Jane described the isolation she felt, the lack of intimacy, and her terror of making love to her husband, fearing he might die in her arms. That book, Music to Move the Stars, was updated in 2007, this time a gentler autobiography, which was turned into the film starring the Oscar-winning Eddie Redmayne and Felicity Jones. Of course, there was never any question of her leaving Stephen. There was no alternative to just carrying on. I felt very committed to Stephen, and I didn't think he could manage without me, she recalled. "I wanted him to carry on doing his amazing work, and I also wanted the children to have a stable family behind them, so we just carried on." Less explicitly, in 2013 Stephen penned his own version of events in a memoir entitled My Brief History, recounting how he gave his blessing to his wife's friendship with Hellier Jones, whom she married in 1997. 2 years after her divorce from Hawking, she was worried I was going to die soon and wanted someone who would give her and the children support and marry her when I was gone, he wrote. She found Jonathan, yet it was Stephen who, on their wedding anniversary in 1990, told Jane that their marriage was over. He moved in with Elaine, whom he married at Cambridge Register Office 5 years later, in a ceremony boycotted by his children. Their marriage, which ended after 11 years, was dogged by allegations that Elaine, a mother of 2 who left her husband to raise their sons after moving in with Stephen, physically abused him, claims he always denied. In 2000, detectives launched an inquiry after the professor made a number of visits to Addenbrooke's Hospital, Cambridge, suffering from cuts and bruises, and another inquiry was opened in 2003 after his daughter, Lucy, rang police. Yet, even after the marriage had crumbled, Stephen remained circumspect. "My marriage to Elaine was passionate and tempestuous," he wrote in his memoir. "We had our ups and downs, but Elaine's being a nurse saved my life on several occasions." Daughter Lucy later spoke of the tempestuous period, calling it a catastrophic time. "I think as a family we had our own falling into a black hole moment," she said. Yesterday, Professor Hawking's sister Philippa Houghton, 71, who lives in Solihull, West Midlands, said he had some difficulty with his feelings. "But I think he lived a good life. There were problems, his marriages that affected all of us in the family and made life difficult." Yesterday, Elaine said of her relationship with Professor Hawking, "I know his first wife likes to put me down. But we had 22 years together which were wonderful. For us, our marriage was loving. People didn't like it and they tore us apart." But at the premiere of The Theory of Everything, it was Jane who was at her former husband's side. Following the film's release, she said, "I feel a great deal of admiration and a lot of love for him too. It's not the same kind of passionate love as before, but yes, I do still love him." On his work describing the eureka moment of a scientific discovery, "I wouldn't compare it, but it lasts longer. I believe alien life is quite common in the universe. Although intelligent life is less so. Some say it has yet to appear on planet Earth. If time travel is possible, where are the tourists from the future?" When people ask me if a God created the universe, I tell them the question itself makes no sense. Time didn't exist before the Big Bang, so there is no time for God to make the universe in. It's like asking for directions to the edge of the Earth. The Earth is a sphere, it does not have an edge, so looking for it is a futile exercise. The idea of 10 dimensions might sound exciting, but they would cause real problems if you forget where you parked your car. I think computer viruses should count as life. I think it says something about human nature that the only form of life we have created so far is purely destructive. We've created life in our own image. My goal is simple. It is a complete understanding of the universe, why it is as it is and why it exists at all. On mankind I have noticed even people who claim everything is predestined, and that we can do nothing to change it, look before they cross the road. We are just an advanced breed of monkeys on a minor planet of a very average star. But we can understand the universe. That makes us something very special. If I had a time machine, I'd visit Marilyn Monroe in her prime or drop in on Galileo as he turned his telescope to the heavens. It is not clear that intelligence has any long-term survival value. If aliens visit us, the outcome would be much as when Columbus landed in America, which didn't turn out well for the Native Americans. We only have to look at ourselves to see how intelligent life might develop into something we wouldn't want to meet. I regard the afterlife to be a fairy story for people that are afraid of the dark. His philosophy of life: the downside of my celebrity is that I cannot go anywhere in the world without being recognized. It is not enough for me to wear dark sunglasses and a wig. The wheelchair gives me away. When I was 12, one of my friends bet another friend a bag of sweets that I would never come to anything. I don't know if this bet was ever settled, and if so, which way it was decided. Asked if he believed he was the most intelligent person in the world, I would never claim this. I have no idea. People who boast about their IQ are losers. Talking about the actor who played him in the 2014 film The Theory of Everything. Unfortunately, Eddie Redmayne did not inherit my good looks. My expectations were reduced to zero when I was 21. Everything since then has been a bonus. Life would be tragic if it weren't funny. 1. Look up at the stars and not down at your feet. 2. Never give up work. Work gives you meaning and purpose, and life is empty without it. 3. If you are lucky enough to find love, remember it is there and don't throw it away. I'm not afraid of death, but I'm in no hurry to die. I have so much to do first.
Where the freaks at?